Nobody handed her anything. Not a piano, not a seat at the table. Not even a kind word when she first walked into a room that was clearly not built for someone like her. But none of that stopped her. And honestly, that is what makes her story worth telling. She grew up in a neighborhood where music meant something different. It meant the sound coming from a speaker someone left by an open window. It meant voices rising in a church on Sunday morning, dipan fools shaking the walls. It meant drums, rhythm, feeling. It was never quiet. It was never polished. It was alive in a way that nothing else was. And she loved it. She grew up inside that sound, and it shaped her in ways she would not fully understand until much later. Classical piano was not part of that world. It lived somewhere else, in concert halls she had never been to, on television channels nobody watched, in the kind of schools that charged fees her family could not afford. It was not that anyone told her it was off limits. Nobody had to. It just existed in a different universe, one that had never once looked her way. She was around 10 years old, the first time she heard it up close. A neighbor a few streets over had an old upright piano pushed against the wall of their living room. It was dusty and slightly out of tune and missing one of its ivory keys. But one afternoon, someone sat down at it and started playing. She does not remember exactly what the piece was. What she remembers is how it felt. Like something opened inside her chest. Like the air in the room changed. She stood outside the window. She had not even been invited in. And she listened until the playing stopped. Then she stood there for a while longer, just in case it started again. She went home that night and could not stop thinking about it. That is the thing about finding something that speaks to you at a deep level. It does not let you go, even when every practical reason in the world tells you to forget about it. She had no piano, no money for lessons, no one in her family who knew anything about classical music. What she had was that sound living in her head, replaying over and over, asking her to come find it again. So she did what she could. She borrowed tapes from the library. She stayed after school to use the old keyboard in the music room when no teacher was around. She watched the fingers of anyone she ever saw playing, trying to memorize the shape of it, the way the hands curved, the way the wrists stayed loose, the way some notes got pressed gently and others got pressed like they meant something urgent. She was teaching herself, without a textbook, without a method, without any real idea of what she was doing. She was just chasing the feeling. By the time she was a teenager, she had gotten good, not formally trained, nothing like that, but there was something real in what she was doing. You could hear it. A music teacher at her school noticed it first, pulling her aside after class one day and telling her she had an ear that most people spend years trying to develop. It was the first time anyone in a position of authority had ever looked at her playing and taken it seriously. She held on to those words like they were something fragile. The teacher encouraged her to apply for a spot in a regional youth music program, a proper one, with tutors, recitals, the whole structure. She filled out the application late at night, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone else had gone to sleep. She wrote about what music meant to her. She submitted a short recording she had made on a borrowed device in a friend's living room. It was not perfect. The acoustics were bad, and the keyboard was small, but the playing was honest. She got a rejection letter 2 weeks later. The wording was polite. It talked about the competitive nature of the selection process and how many talented applicants they had received. But one of the administrators, she later found out through someone who knew someone, had apparently remarked during the review that the kind of background she came from did not typically produce classical musicians, that the training simply was not there, that it would be doing her a disservice to place her among students who had been playing since they were 4 years old. She sat with that for a long time. There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from someone insulting you directly, but from being quietly measured against a standard you were never given a fair chance to meet, and then being found lacking, as if that was always the expected outcome. It does not come with shouting or visible cruelty. It comes soft and final, like a door closing in another room. You hear it, but you cannot quite prove it happened, she cried. She would not pretend otherwise. She had worked hard, and she had let herself hope, and hope is a heavy thing to carry when it drops. But here is the part that matters. She did not quit. Not because she was made of some extraordinary material that other people are not made of, not because the pain did not reach her. It did. It reached her fully. She felt every bit of it. But underneath all of that, Underneath the rejection, and the quiet humiliation, and the very reasonable voice in her head saying maybe this was never yours to want, underneath all of it, there was still that sound, still that music, still that feeling she had felt standing outside a neighbor's window at 10 years old, listening to something that cracked her open. You cannot unfeel something like that. You cannot logic your way out of it. So she made a decision. Not a loud one, not a dramatic one. She did not stand in front of a mirror and give herself a speech. She simply woke up the next morning and decided she was going to keep going. She was going to find a way in, through the back, through the side, through whatever gap she could find. Because the alternative was spending the rest of her life wondering what might have happened if she had not let them decide for her. She found a community center 3 bus rides from her house that had a real piano and a practice room. She asked if she could use it. Tay sighed. She started going every week, then twice a week, then as often as she possibly could. She set goals for herself, specific pieces she wanted to learn, specific technical problems she wanted to solve. She read everything she could find about theory and technique. She watched recordings of great pianists and studied them the way other people study for exams. Nobody was grading her. Nobody was watching. There were no certificates being offered, no benchmarks being checked off by an official institution. It was just her and the piano and the stubborn, unshakable belief that she belonged in that room, even when every external signal she had received told her otherwise. That is where part 1 ends. Not with triumph. Not yet. Just with a girl who had been told no, who had every reason to stop, and who sat down at a piano anyway. Because some things, once they find you, do not let go, and she had stopped trying to make them. There is something about practicing alone. Really alone. With no audience. No approval. No one keeping score. That either breaks you or builds you into something stronger. For her, it built her. Slowly. Quietly. In a way that nobody around her could fully see yet. She kept going to that community center, week after week, through cold mornings and long evenings, through days when her hands were tired and her mind was somewhere else entirely. She would sit down at that piano and start from the beginning. The same passages, the same difficult runs, the same stretches that still did not feel natural under her fingers. Progress in music is not always something you can hear right away. Sometimes it lives in the small adjustments, the tiny corrections, the moments where something that used to take 10 tries suddenly takes only 3. She collected those moments like they were currency. She had started working through one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire. Not because someone told her to, not because she was trying to prove something to the people who had rejected her. She chose it because she loved it. Because the first time she heard a recording of it, something in the structure of the music felt like it was describing something she had lived. She could not explain that to anyone, but she did not need to explain it. She just needed to learn it. The piece was long, complex, full of passages that required a kind of technical control that takes most trained pianists years to develop. Her hands were not small, and they were not large, just ordinary hands, the kind nobody would look at and immediately think, those belong at a concert, grand. But she worked with what she had. She adapted her technique. She found her own way through the hard parts, which was sometimes different from the way the textbooks described, but it worked for her body and her instincts. Then, about 8 months into this particular stretch of practice, something went wrong with her wrist. It started as a dull ache she tried to ignore. Then it became a sharper pain she could not ignore. The doctor told her she had developed a repetitive strain injury, not severe, but serious enough that she needed to stop playing for at least 6 weeks. 6 weeks. She sat in that waiting room afterward and stared at the floor and felt the full weight of what that meant. Not just the time lost, but the momentum, the rhythm of daily practice that she had built so carefully, and that now had to be set down completely. Those 6 weeks were harder than the rejection had been. The rejection, at least, had made her angry. Anger has energy in it. Anger moves. But this was just stillness and silence, and her hands sitting useless in her lap, while the music lived somewhere she could not reach. She would catch herself mentally playing through passages late at night, her fingers moving faintly against the blanket, the muscle memory working even when the body was not allowed to follow. That is how deep it had gone. The music was not something she did anymore. It was something she was. People around her were kind, mostly. A few of them quietly suggested that maybe this was a sign, that she should rest, not just for 6 weeks, but longer, that she had given it a real try and there was no shame in stepping back. They meant well. That is the thing about people who love you. Sometimes the most gentle voices are also the ones most capable of steering you away from the thing you were meant to do. She listened. She nodded. She kept her own counsel. When the 6 weeks were up, Say went back. She did not rush it. She started slow, relearning how to position her hands in a way that would protect the wrist going forward. She adjusted her posture. She shortened her practice sessions and built them back up gradually. It took another 2 months before she was playing at the level she had been before the injury. But here is what she noticed when she came back. Something had shifted. The time away had not just been absent. It had been a kind of processing. She returned to the piece she had been working on and found that parts of it had settled into her understanding in a way they had not before she stopped. Sometimes the mind works hardest when the hands go quiet. She finished learning the full piece 3 months later. It took her a while to decide what to do with that. For a long time, she played it only for herself, in that practice room at the community center, with no one listening. The door closed. She was not sure she was ready to share it. Or maybe more honestly, she was not sure the world was ready to receive it from someone who looked like her, came from where she came from, learned the way she had learned. A woman who ran the community center eventually asked her to play at a small evening event they were hosting, nothing formal, just a gathering of local people, a few dozen at most. She almost said no. She thought about the last time she had put herself forward, the rejection letter, the quiet comment that had filtered back to her about her background, not producing classical musicians. She thought about all of it, and then she said yes. She played the full piece from memory. Every note, every dynamic shift, every quiet passage, and every moment where the music swelled into something bigger than the room seemed able to hold. She did not look up much. She was not performing for approval. She was simply playing the way she had always played, in private, for no audience but herself and the music and whatever it was that had refused to let go of her all those years ago outside that neighbor's window. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment longer than she expected. Then the applause came, and it was not polite applause. The kind people give to be kind. It was the kind that comes from people who were genuinely moved, who were not expecting to feel what they felt, who sat in that community center on an ordinary evening and found themselves inside something unexpectedly real. An older man in the front row had tears on his face. He did not look embarrassed about it. A young girl near the back, maybe 10, maybe 11, was watching her with the same expression she imagined she had worn standing outside that window all those years before. That moment mattered more to her than any formal recognition could have. Word moved the way it does in small communities. Someone who had been at the event told someone else. A local music teacher heard about it and reached out. A small arts organization asked if she would be willing to play at a fundraiser. She said yes. She played again. And again, each time to a slightly larger room, each time with the same rootedness she had developed alone in that practice space. The certainty that she was not a guest in this music, not a curiosity, not an exception to be noted. She was simply a pianist, one who had come to the instrument by an unconventional road, who had been told the road was not hers to walk, and who had walked it anyway. She'd never heard back from the program that had rejected her. She did not look for closure there. Some doors stay closed, and eventually you stop needing them to open because you built a different door entirely. What stays with her, she has said in quiet conversations, is not the difficulty of what she went through, though it was genuinely difficult. What stays with her is the clarity it gave her. Every time someone told her this was not for people like her, they were telling her something about themselves, about the limits of their imagination, about the narrow way they had been taught to see the world. They were not telling her anything true about her. She knows that now. She knew it then, somewhere underneath all the doubt. She just had to keep going long enough to prove it, not to them, but to the quieter, more important audience inside herself. The piano was always hers. It just took a while for the world to catch up.